Hello, good afternoon, or hello. We're glad you're joining us today. You may be listening in the morning, but this is being produced in an afternoon. So thank you for joining us today. We are on part two of a two-part series that's really about our host, Molly White's journey as she has traveled her abortion and post-abortion life and the ways her story has been utilized and God has brought purpose from her pain. So today we just do want you to know that we will be talking about abortion, not so much detail today, but you just may be careful. If you have children around, there may be times when you might need to shield them from hearing information. And if anything happens today or you hear anything in the program that triggers you, we just hope you will see that as an invitation to step into healing and to seek out healing. There will be healing available. You can find healing at the H3 helpline at 866-721-7881, or you can go to operationoutcry.org and there will also be healing resources there. So with that having been said, we welcome you and we welcome Molly White to her own podcast. More to the story with Molly White, and I'm Mary Browning today. Thank you, Molly, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mary, for stepping in and being the host today and interviewing me. So I think it's cool that, our listeners, I interviewed you earlier, and for our listeners to get to know who we are. So I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and you know what? I'm not used to doing this. You usually recognize our sponsor, Dr. Stephen Hotze
Mhm.
at Health and Wellness Center. They are in Texas.
Yeah, Hotze Health and Wellness in Katy, Texas.
Katy, Texas, Hotze Health and Wellness. So thank you for filling that in.
Sure.
So Molly, we've heard about your testimony, and you've told us about your book, the title being Deceived. But you have more to your story too, don't you?
I do.
And there's a couple of experiences or a couple of broad categories that I would love for our listeners to hear about your life. One of them has to do with your experience at the UN. So, can you tell us about that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And if our viewers recall that we interviewed Millie Lace, a couple of weeks ago, and she kind of talked about some of her involvement with the United Nations. And it was actually Millie and I were the first women to go to United Nations. We were together with Operation Outcry, so that's how we knew each other. And then I got an invitation, and I don't know where it came from, but in my email, I got an invitation from the Catholic Families, CFAM, Catholic Families out of New York, and their whole ministry is involved around the United Nations. And they're pro life, pro family, pro Christian organization. And so they were looking for volunteer lobbyists to attend the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women conference, which is held every spring of the year. And I just felt I just felt the Lord was calling me to go to this and to volunteer for them. And so uh, I guess I sent the email out to some of the ladies that I knew with Operation Outcry, and Millie Lace responded that she would like to go. So she and I met in New York. I think she found a hotel that was owned by a Baptist church. It was about 10 blocks from the United Nations, which is pretty far in New York. But this church owned this hotel and they were connected. So we got a really cheap room. They knew why we were coming. And so we met there at the hotel. And next day, got up, got ready, went to the UN, met up with CFAM officials, and we were kind of introduced to some other pro life leaders that were there. And our assignment was to attend side events where they were talking about the abortion issue and handing out whatever they wanted us to do, we did. But we met this incredible man named Peter Smith, and I giggle because he's got such a great sense of humor. But let me tell you, he's been on the battlefield at the United Nations for decades,
Mm.
ever since abortion became legal. And so he really kind of helped guide us, helped point us where we needed to go, and what we needed to do. And of course, I'm there, and Millie and I are there at this huge building, and we're attending a Commission on the Status of Women conference, and there's women from all over the world there, and they're all dressed in their normal clothing, especially the women from Africa. I was very attracted to the women from Africa because they dress so beautifully. And so we just met all these women, and told our stories, and just made all these connections. And then we sat in some of the meetings, some of the big meetings where you can sit up in the a viewer stand, and listen. And then we started learning what was going on there. They were pushing abortion as demand as the answer to every problem that anyone could possibly have. And so anyway, from after our first trip there, I was seeking the Lord, like, why do you have me here? What are you trying to show me? What do you want me to do? But we were there for a week. I think it was just a week. It might have been 2 weeks. It's a 2 week conference. And I just really got to the point where I just said, Lord, I see what's going on here. They're having this huge women's conference, pretending like they really care about the issues that women are facing all around the world. Like, we need better health care, we need clean water, we need job opportunities, entrepreneurship, things like that. And all of the answers were, well, you just had abortion, if you just had abortion, if you just had abortion. And so I thought, Lord, if you send me back here every year with an army of pro life women who've had an abortion, that way we can, speak from experience, we will come back. I'll come back, and we'll take this place, you know. And so the next year, Millie and I came back, and I think we had 13 women from all over the country. The next year, we might have had 20 or 30. We brought in teams that would lead us in praise and worship. So before we would go to the United Nations, before we started our week, we'd be prayed up, praised up. God would give us our assignments, and of course, I led these teams because I had the experience, but and I would give them their assignments. I said, what we do when we walk in that building is we are the ambassadors of Christ. We're representing the kingdom of God. So we have all spiritual authority and men's authority to go there. I said, the joy of the Lord is our strength. So when we go in this dark, demonic place, and let me tell you, it's dark and demonic, very oppressive. And you can feel it when you walk in that door. I said, but when we go into this place, you represent the Lord, the joy of the Lord is our strength, and you allow God to use you. And we had tons of pro-life resources. We had handouts. I mean, we gave out, I'm telling you, literally truckloads of information about abortion harm, pro-life things. And let me tell you, women from most of the African continent, um, Asia, the Middle East, they wanted that material. And so we started going back to educate women about what the language meant that they were, putting out there at the UN, like reproductive health, reproductive rights, um, reproductive freedom. I mean, they use these words very deceivingly. And so we would interpret what those meant, because most of these women who went as delegates, they had voting privileges. And so we wanted to make sure they were educated. So we did that for several years. And then we thought, well, let's start having conferences. Let's start having side events. Because as a NGO, a non-government organization, you can request to have a side event and educate women who come to these conferences on whatever topic you wanted. Of course, we had to be clever. We couldn't say pro-life, anti-abortion. We couldn't say anything about abortion. But we kind of really, God gave us this wisdom and creativity on how to use their language, but use it for life. And so we started getting all these side events. Let me tell you, we had the most well attended side events than any other group. And we also had the best comments afterwards, the best response afterwards. And it got to be, this is like maybe in our sixth or seventh year, we're making such a huge impact that now they're trying to keep us from coming or keep us from having side events.
And Molly, the listeners may be kind of like me. I'm not really sure. So when you say side event, is the UN, or is it a big room with a lot of people, but then there's other things going on at the same time, or
Yeah.
is it just lots of, okay,
Yeah. It's a huge building, but it has many different rooms,
okay,
for different purposes. So they would have their conference, and then sometimes in between what was going on at the UN, there were many buildings close to the UN
okay,
that had rooms available for us to have our side events. That means they could just walk across the street, attend another event, and get educated on whatever topic was being
okay.
discussed. So that's a side of it. Um,
I
no, no,
think,
no. I apologize. That's called a parallel event. It's going on at the same time.
okay,
Side event is when a UN mission, which every country that's part of the United States is called a UN mission. And these missions can have side events inside the UN building. So
okay,
you don't have to walk across the street. So, and they are sponsoring the event. So the member states, that's what they're called, member states can sponsor a side event, and they usually have executive privileges because they're a member state to get a room to get an event
okay,
organized. So, and we've done both of those things. Uh,
okay. So you've done the parallel event and the side event.
right,
Okay, so
and
inside the UN building and outside, and in
yeah,
a different building.
in a
Okay,
different building
thank
close
you.
by. So those were very popular. And then Denise Mountainay, I think she came the second or third year. A friend of mine from Canada. We're going to have her on the show one of these days. Um, she was with us involved in all these, and we put on some incredible side events. We had, many of the doctors that we've interviewed speaking there. Was it Priscilla Coleman, Donna Harrison, um, uh, um, gosh,
Martha Shupin?
yes, Martha Shuping. Well, she was there all the time anyway, but we brought in these excellent experts to speak on whatever subjects. So, but Denise said, hey, why are we working with the tail? We need to go after the head. So we started making appointments with UN ambassadors to meet with them to talk about the pro life. And so then we started meeting with the head of the missions. I'm telling you, we've met with dozens of UN ambassadors, bringing in our message about abortion harm, what's best for women. If you legalize abortion in your country, this is the risk that you're opening yourself up to, and we were very well received. There was one country that was kind of a little hostile. This was during the Obama administration, but anyway, most of the time, the information was very well received, and we got a lot of favor from them. But I guess the most important thing is that we went, but we learned through the years that, boy, this is such a spiritual stronghold. It's like a temple of Baal, if you ask me. And all the women in this and the men, they're priests and prophets of Baal. And Baal in the Old Testament was a false god, a god, but he and Molech demanded infant sacrifice, you know. And so, anyway, spiritually, we had to grow and learn and be taught by even local intercessors how to prepare to go into that place and be successful, because we came under attack all the time. And
Mm.
but we've laid hands on people and prayed in tongues. I mean, we did a lot of ministry as well as kingdom work there, but our pro life work. So it still is. It's an incredible experience where you can really be introduced to women and men from all over the world and have such a huge impact.
So, Molly, I didn't think about this, but if somebody wanted to contact you, even about being active at the UN, would they just contact you through More to the Story?
Yeah, absolutely. Contact me through more of the story. Normally, the UN events are like in March or April, and so um, they closed down several years, 4 years, I think, because of COVID, and did them online. But they had the event the first time this past year. So, yes, they can contact me. But I want to tell you a funny story, Mary, if we have time. Do we have time?
We do. We have time. Yes.
So I'm sitting in a conference at the UN during the Commission on Status of Women, and the women speakers were talking about, we need abortion as health care. Abortion saves women lives. Women are dying because they don't have a legal abortion, and they're stealing their spiel. And I'm sitting at a long table, and they all have microphones, and there's tape row after row, and down a few seats from me was a doctor. He might have been from Brazil. He did have he spoke in English and in whatever Brazilian is, and he was speaking. He was sharing. You can everyone that goes in these events has an opportunity to speak. Okay, after the presentation. And so he was just really going on and on about abortion, and he was an abortionist. And so I have, through the years, I've always taken a one-page testimony, and everyone on my team has taken their testimonies. We've handed thousands of them out. Well, I have my testimony probably in, I would say, roughly 9 different languages. And so I was getting really angry with what he was saying. It doesn't hurt women, and blah. And so I just slid my testimony down there in front of him. And he picks it up and he reads it. And he looks at me and he looks at the paper again and he points and goes, "Is that you?" I said, "Yeah, that's me. Abortion hurts women," because that's what my testimony says, something on there that abortion hurts women. So anyway, I had an interesting discussion with him afterwards. And I said, "Don't tell me it doesn't hurt women." I said, "You're saying that just to protect yourself." But I've had a lot of experiences there, and how God opened up so many doors and made a path that seemed like there was no path, a way that seemed like there was no way. He made it all possible. I mean, it's just incredible. I need just to write a book about that experience, really.
Well, you did. So you started. When did you start going to the UN, Molly?
I don't recall, but I think it was around 2003.
Okay, pretty early on then.
Pretty early on.
So,
And you know what really kind of helped prepare me? And it's not that you have to be this way, but I think why God called me in particular is because I grew up in a military officer's home, and I was introduced to ambassadors. I mean, I was introduced to military leaders. I mean, we were given opportunities, or had opportunities to meet with highly elected officials. And so I think really that kind of prepared me to be able to go into the United Nations, go to these conferences, meet with ambassadors, because I had that quote unquote training or experience growing up. I knew how to speak to them, I knew how to conduct myself, I knew how to be diplomatic. And I'm always diplomatic at the UN, but I get my point across, you know.
mhm, I can imagine.
And so I think for me, that was very helpful. But it's not saying that you do have to have that kind of experience, because I really went in cold turkey, not knowing what God was really wanting of me. But I guess I want to encourage our listeners and our viewers that when God calls you to do something, like I said earlier, you don't have to be educated, equipped, prepared, have all the experience to go through that door he opens up for you. You just have to be willing to walk through that door and allow God to use you.
Mm.
And
I
he
just
will use you.
I want to thank you, Molly, because clearly he's used you a lot. Because when he called you, when you were on that porch, sitting on that porch, and that verse, what was it? It was
Proverbs
Proverbs
24, 11, and 12.
11. And that really meant a lot to you. And you have been speaking out ever since, I think.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Mary, because you're doing the same. I've just been doing it a little bit longer because that's what God called me to do. You know, I was expecting to go back to school and get my master's degree in counseling, and instead, He took me on a different journey.
You've been counseling, but in a different way,
Yes, and I've
in
done
a
a lot of
sense.
counseling. I've done a lot of counseling, a lot of ministry, a lot of praying, and I've done all of that. But
That's
just
right.
in ways and in places and by going to the UN, we got invited to go to so many different countries. I've
Mm.
been to so many different countries, educating them on the pro-life issue and the abortion issue, and speaking to. I've met with presidents' wives, leaders of different legislatures across the world, really, and different groups, and so it's just been an amazing ride.
Well, that's very interesting that you would have, and when you said yes and you started speaking out, all the different doors that have been opened to you. I want to talk about a door that you knocked on, another door that you knocked on, because you did also run for legislature, didn't you,
I
in
did not
Texas?
knock on that door.
You didn't knock on that door. Well, tell us about
That door.
that.
God knocked on that door.
God knocked on that door.
It was
Okay.
another similar experience to when God called me out of Proverbs 24:11 and 12, except this time I wasn't reading scripture. But I got a phone call from a guy that I barely knew, but I knew him. And he said, Molly, this is John and so and so. He said, would you consider running for state representative against the current representative? And I'm telling you, Mary, it was like the same experience I had on July 24th, 2001. Boom! Sonic boom hit me right in the chest. And it was like God was speaking to me over the phone. And I thought, oh, well, yes, I will. And right then, Mary, I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And I had never, ever had any political aspirations. Was I involved in politics? You bet. I was down to the state legislature every session. I was uh, testifying on pro life legislation. I was working with uh, uh, legislative elected members, representatives, senators, governor, so I was very involved in that. But I didn't want anything to take away from my pro life work. So that's why I never considered running for state representative or for any kind of office. But then God spoke. And so I talked to my husband, talked to my family, had meetings, called all the people that I knew across the state, that I'd known through all of my lobbying, volunteer lobbying in Austin. Yes, 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 do it. Only got one no from a pro life group, which I'll talk. That's a long story. They're not really pro life. And so I did. And it was a miraculous win. It was purely miraculous. God showed himself mighty the whole time. My focus was on what God called me to do what I have to do. I said, God, I'll do my part. And let me tell you, I worked my butt off. I knocked on thousands of doors. I went to all of the events. I had fundraisers. I did every opportunity. But God is the one that miraculously helped me win that election or caused me to win that election. And so that was an experience in itself. Mhm.
Wow. So you ran for legislature and won. And what would you tell our listeners that are thinking like this? Well, maybe unlike you, they may be considering it because they feel passion, they feel a calling. What would you tell them about your experience? Um,
Well, God does give us the desire of our hearts, right? And so if
yeah.
you're really feeling passionate about serving the Lord in the legislature, which I'd encourage every Christian to do that, then just pray and say, okay, Lord, I want to follow what you are calling me to do. And I want to be obedient to what you're teaching me. Just surrender yourself and ask him to give you everything you need to run that campaign. Now, for me, I got great people around me. A lot of people in the community knew me, known throughout the whole county, well known in the pro life community and the Christian community.
Mhm.
So, people like my wonderful producer, I think he was supportive but I just had a great team And even though we spent around $20,000, my opponent spent over $200,000, and we're in a smaller community. Um, and my yard signs didn't come in until, just like a week before early voting started. My campaign team, they're all going, this is terrible. I said, don't look to the left, don't look to the right. Keep your eyes focused on the prize ahead. You have a goal in mind. You reach that goal, leave it up to the Lord to see what happens. And so, we just kind of pressed in and pressed on. And I had to keep sometimes my team encouraged, but they were faithful. Boy, they were out block walking, they were answering phones, they were making phone calls, they were doing everything that they could. And even though it really was a miraculous win. It really was. So
Well, while you've been talking, Molly, one of the verses, and I always forget the address, but it's from the Bible. It's a scripture. It's about God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called.
that's
And
right.
so, I think your life is really a testament about that.
It is. It is. I remember one time, coming back from a trip or something and in bed with my husband, and I just kind of rolled over and looked at him. I said, it blows my mind that I'm a simple nobody. I'm just an average gal from a small town. Home, I stayed at home raising my kids, and how God has used me. I said, it is unbelievable. Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, and He
I
can
love
use
that.
anybody and everybody.
So
He's
you,
just waiting for someone to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." You know.
and you did that.
Mhm.
So I just want to recap a little bit then about what we've heard about your story, Molly. We started out and we heard your testimony of abortion, which had a lot of pain. And then we heard your testimony of healing and recovery from that. Then we heard how God, I guess the order of things. Did you write the book after you became a representative?
Yes, after I didn't win my second run, and so that's when I focused on writing my book. Yes, so that was
Okay.
in 2000. Let's see, I served in 2015 to 2017, so I wrote it, and it came out in 2018.
Okay.
Mhm.
And in between there, like before you ran for office, you were serving at the UN at different times.
At the United
And
Nations, I was very involved with Operation Outcry, very involved in pro-life ministry. I
Mhm.
had a radio show, TV show, so I was always pro-lifing.
And now you have a podcast,
Now we have this podcast. Amen.
More to the Story with Molly White. And
Mhm.
so this is the more to your story. So
Right.
I'm really thankful that we have got to had the chance to tell more of your story so that our listeners will know more about you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the listeners about your experience or your life that before we wrap up this part two?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind would be no matter how old you are, uh, no matter how long ago your abortion may have been, if you haven't gone through healing, there's still wounds there and they're deeply hidden, deeply buried, but they're still affecting you. So we encourage you to go to operationoutcry.org or call the helpline number and go through a recovery, because God
Mhm.
has got a purpose for you. He's got a purpose, because in the Bible it says to comfort those with the same comfort we ourselves received. If we
Mhm.
haven't received healing and deliverance from the Lord, how can we help someone else through that?
That's
And
right.
so,
Mm.
but He's got a purpose for you, and He can still use you no matter what your age is. He can still use you if you're willing just to lay it all down, put your fears aside, and let Him use you, you know.
And I think our producer, while you were talking about that and talking about comforting those with the comfort we've been given, our producer put up the verse, I believe it was 2 Corinthians 1, 3 and 4. So
Yeah.
thank you, Terrence, to our producer. That's good.
If we have real 1 minute, I don't want to go too long, but this is real important, I think. When God first called me to share my testimony, I mentioned I went with Alan Parker with the Justice Foundation. We flew to
Yes.
Washington, D.C. to attend the Shake the Nation Back to Life conference event hosted by Janet Folger, just Janet Folger Porter now.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I went with him because I might have the opportunity to share my story at this conference. But when he invited me to go, I agreed to go. But as soon as I hung up the phone, I had a full-fledged panic attack. I'm on the floor. I can't breathe. My stomach's tight. My chest is pounding. I'm froze. I'm in this fetal position almost on the floor. This fear just hit me. And I knew what it was, but in the midst of my panic attack, I heard the Lord say, "Who are you afraid of?" Because that's where panic and fear comes from, right? Or panic, is fear. And I wanted to say everybody. It's like if I tell people on a national scale what I have done, I will be stoned to death. I'll be judged. I'll be condemned. And that thought just overtook me. And so what came out of my mouth is, "I fear you and you alone, Lord." And he said to me, "What can man do to you?" He goes, "Do I not hold the keys to your life in my hands? Has the blood of my son not washed your sin as white as snow?
Mm.
Do I not
Mhm.
remember those things anymore?" And then he's asked me again, "What can man do to you?" And boy,
That's
I said, "Lord, I fear you and you alone." And after he told me those things, peace came over me. I got up off the floor and I said, "Okay, I'm going." But I did go in fear and trembling. I can't deny that. I was shaking and I had some fear. I took my daughter with me as my security blanket. And even when I was offered the opportunity to share my testimony at this press conference, I was shaking. My feet were sweating, my hands were sweating, and my voice was cracking, but I shared my story. And I did not get stoned. I did not get rejected. I got accepted and loved. And
ah,
it was what took me to say, "Okay, I can do this," you know. And you're not going to be stoned. You're not going to be rejected by sharing your testimony. You're not. I have seen it millions of times. So don't be afraid. Go in fear and trembling. If you have to, just go.
you have to do it. Do it even afraid if you need to. Oh, wow. I think what an inspiration you have been, Molly. And I just pray that our listeners have been blessed and inspired
Me
by
too.
your story, by your vulnerability and your willingness to speak. Your not just your story, but how God um, has brought purpose from the pain. So
Amen.
thank you, and thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us again on More to the Story with Molly White.